The twin suns of Irinder 9 hung low over the dusty plains, painting the horizon in blood orange and deep violet. The world was quiet but not peaceful. Cracked metal ruins jutted from the ground, remnants of failed colonies, abandoned settlements, and old machinery left to rust under the relentless sun. Wind whipped across the landscape, carrying dust and the faint smell of scorched minerals. Most humans had long left this planet, too dangerous, too empty. But some stayed, drifters, scavengers, and one man who had never known the word quit. Ronan Callis rode slowly across the plains, his hoverbike kicking up clouds of red dust. His coat flapped behind him like a banner, worn and scorched at the edges. The hum of the engine was the only sound he allowed himself, a rhythm to keep his mind sharp. The land was harsh, full of dangers that could end a life in a blink. Unstable ground, hidden fissures, rogue scavenger drones programmed to attack anything moving, and worse, creatures driven to desperation by hunger. Most travelers would have avoided this plateau entirely, but Ronan had learned long ago that fear was a tool, not a master. Ahead, a faint shimmer caught his eye. He slowed the bike, squinting. At first, it looked like a mirage, a trick of the twin suns dancing across the dusty air. Then he saw it clearly, a massive dragon, her wings sagging, her scales dull and chipped. She lay atop the plateau, barely moving, as if she had surrendered to the heat and hunger. Next to her, a smaller figure crouched, delicate, translucent wings flickering like fragile glass, ribs visible under thin skin. The smaller one, a hatchling, pressed against her side as if afraid to move. Ronan felt a tightness in his chest. The sight was raw, almost unbearable. Most humans, even the bravest, would have turned and left. But he knew what needed to be done. Life here had rules, cruel ones, but understanding them gave an edge. These dragons were intelligent, social, and proud. They were not monsters, they were survivors. And they were starving. He eased off his bike, keeping his movements slow and calm. The dragon's amber eyes opened, glowing faintly in the dimming light, and focused on him. The gaze was sharp, piercing, full of suspicion. Then came the voice, low and cracked, a rasping whisper that seemed almost like the wind itself. "We haven't eaten in days." The words carried despair but also a spark, life clinging to life. Ronan reached into his satchel and pulled out a small pouch of nutrient gel, synthesized and carefully balanced. Most humans would consider it barely enough to survive for a single day. He held it out slowly. The dragon sniffed, recoiled, and then fixed him with a stare that weighed him like a judgment. He didn't flinch. He knew patience, timing, and respect were as critical as strength here. The hatchling stirred, whining softly, but did not approach. He knelt, keeping his body low, and spoke softly. "I don't have much, but I can help. I need you to trust me just a little." The words were human, simple, but he felt them carry a weight that transcended species. The dragon's wings twitched. She lowered her head slightly, testing him, calculating, judging. The air was thick with tension. One wrong move and the dragons could lash out, their strength enough to crush him. The plateau was eerily quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Dust swirled around them as Ronan sat, waiting. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time felt distorted. Finally, the dragon dipped her head just enough to sniff the pouch. The hatchling edged forward, tiny wings trembling, and inhaled cautiously. Ronan exhaled quietly, relief warming his chest. One step taken. Survival depended on more than food. It depended on understanding, courage, and trust, the kind only humans could balance against danger. But the moment of calm did not last. From the distant canyon below, the faint hum of scavenger drones grew louder, mechanical eyes glinting in the twin sun. They were programmed to eliminate any living thing not registered as human, drawn by biosignals, and the dragon's energy signature would have triggered every alarm. If the drones found them, neither dragon nor human would survive. Ronan's jaw tightened. He had faced dangerous creatures, rogue machines, and hostile humans before, but now the stakes were higher than ever. The dragons were vulnerable, their survival precarious, and the canyon below was crawling with enemies. One mistake, one miscalculation, and everything he had just worked for would vanish. He scanned the horizon, mapping the canyon in his mind, considering every option, every angle of attack or escape. His instincts were honed from years of surviving impossible odds, but this challenge was unlike anything he had faced. Not because the danger was greater, but because it was more fragile. Life itself, innocent, in desperate need of human ingenuity to survive. The dragon's eyes met his again, amber flames flickering with silent plea. The hatchling nuzzled her side, weak but alive. And in that moment Ronan made a decision. He would not leave. He would not let them die here, alone and starving. The canyon awaited, danger and uncertainty waiting in its shadows, but he had no choice. Courage was the only path forward. He hoisted the pouch of nutrient gel, slung it across his chest, and took a careful step toward the edge of the plateau, eyes fixed on the canyon below. The wind howled, dust biting at his face as he whispered under his breath, "We'll survive this. I promise." Then, from the shadows of the jagged cliffs, came a flicker of movement, fast, deliberate, and not natural. Something was watching. And whatever it was, it would test every ounce of human courage he had. Ronan crouched at the edge of the plateau, the wind tugging at his coat, his eyes scanning the canyon below. Shadows stretched across jagged rocks, twisting with the last light of Arinder IX's twin suns. Every movement in that canyon could be fatal. The scavenger drones were precise, relentless. One wrong step, one faint spark of light, and the entire plateau could erupt into death. He clenched his fists, feeling the rough leather of his gloves against his palms. He had faced dangers before, but this was different. Here, every action had consequences far beyond himself. The dragon widow groaned softly behind him, wings barely lifting, each breath labored. The hatchling whimpered, small claws scraping against the scorched metal beneath it. Ronan's chest tightened. Their survival depended on more than nutrient gel, it depended on real food, real energy. The plateau was barren. Nothing grew here. The only chance of sustenance lay in the canyon below, a place crawling with danger, where rogue bots scavenged tirelessly for biosignatures, ready to attack anything alive. He drew in a slow breath and considered the canyon's minerals. Plasma fungi grew in clusters along the cliffs, glowing faintly blue, bioluminescent veins pulsing with life. Most humans avoided it, it was toxic if eaten raw. But Ronan had studied the old survival manuals and experimental biology notes left in the abandoned colonies. With the right process, the fungi could be neutralized, retaining enough nutrients to feed even a dragon. He could do it. He just needed time, precision, and luck. Ronan glanced back at the dragons. Their eyes followed him, amber flames dimmed by hunger. He could feel their trust, fragile as the hatchling's trembling wings, balanced on a knife's edge. He whispered, "I'll get you something real. Just stay here." The dragon tilted her head, nostrils flaring as if she understood. The hatchling pressed closer to her side, small glowing eyes wide, afraid. He slid down the plateau's edge, boots digging into loose rock. The canyon below stretched wide, uneven, lined with jagged cliffs and narrow passes. Every corner could hide a drone. Ronan moved silently, exosuit sensors scanning for movement, vibrations, and heat signatures. The first wave of drones appeared without warning, hovering low, mechanical wings cutting through the thin air. Their red sensors flickered as they scanned the terrain. One wrong flash, one misstep, and they would strike. Ronan ducked behind a jagged boulder, heart hammering. His pulse synced with the faint hum of the drones. Carefully, he reached into his pack and pulled out microstabilizer grenades, small devices designed to neutralize toxins in seconds. He couldn't carry too many, weight would slow him down. Each grenade had to count. If he miscalculated, the dragons could die from exposure or from the very fungi he intended to harvest. He edged forward, timing every step with the drone's patterns. One moved closer, scanning, sensors blinking like cold eyes. Ronan froze, holding his breath. The drone hovered over a cliff edge, then turned away, drawn by a false heat signature he had set up earlier. Small victories like this kept him alive, but they were fragile. Every success relied on human judgment, split-second decisions, and courage. Finally, he reached a cluster of fungi. The glowing blue mushrooms pulsed softly, almost hypnotic. He knelt, carefully placing microstabilizers along the edges. Sparks hissed as the devices neutralized toxins. Sweat ran down his face. One false spark and the fungi could release a toxic cloud, deadly enough to wipe out even a human at close range. But Ronan had done this before in simulations, and his hands moved with calm precision, honed over years of survival. The stabilizers worked. He harvested the fungi quickly, packing them into reinforced containment tubes. Just as he finished, a drone detected the heat from his exosuit. Red lights flashed, a warning beep shrilling in his helmet. He cursed under his breath and scanned for escape routes. There was no straight path back, the canyon was too exposed. He needed a diversion. Ronan reached into his pack and activated a graviton flare, throwing it toward a narrow fissure. The flare ignited, sending a pulse of energy that drew the drone's attention. One by one they veered away, chasing the false signature. Ronan didn't wait. He sprinted, leaping over rocks and climbing short walls, carrying the precious fungi back toward the plateau. Every second mattered. If he fell, if a drone caught him mid-climb, the dragons would starve. At the plateau's edge, he paused, gasping, looking back at the canyon. Shadows shifted as drones recalibrated, moving toward him again. But the dragons waited, fragile, hungry, trusting. He had the food. He had to get it to them before the drones returned. He tightened his grip on the containment tubes, feeling the weight of survival itself pressing down. The wind whipped across the plateau, carrying dust and the faint sound of mechanical whirring from below. Ronan's eyes met the dragon widow's. She lifted her head slightly, weak but alert, sensing that something had changed. Her amber gaze searched him, questioning, hopeful. The hatchling chirped softly, wings trembling. They needed him to act fast. Ronan whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "Just a little further, we can make it." He took a careful step forward, the edge of the plateau cracking slightly beneath his boot. Dust fell into the abyss. One false move could send him plummeting. And somewhere below, the drones were closing in, drawn to every trace of life he carried. But Ronan didn't stop. Survival, courage, and hope were his only weapons. And he would use every ounce of human ingenuity to save them. The canyon was waiting. And he had no choice but to face it. Ronan crouched at the plateau's edge, peering down into the canyon. The shadows of jagged cliffs stretched like claws, and the faint hum of scavenger drones echoed from below. Every instinct screamed danger. One wrong step and the dragons, the precious fungi, and even he himself could be destroyed. Yet the canyon held the only chance to save them. He took a deep breath, steadying his pulse. This was human courage, facing near impossible odds with nothing but skill, intellect, and determination. He lowered himself carefully, gripping loose rock, sliding down to a narrow ledge. Dust and pebbles tumbled into the abyss, but he moved slowly, deliberately, balancing weight with precise calculation. The dragon's lives rested in his hands, and failure was not an option. Even a minor misstep would alert the drones below. Their mechanical eyes were precise, their sensors almost inhuman. Yet he had studied their patterns, memorized their patrols, and knew their blind spots. At the canyon floor, the plasma fungi glowed faintly blue. Their light reflected off the canyon walls, pulsing with an eerie rhythm. Ronan knelt beside a cluster and placed a microstabilizer device against its base. Sparks hissed as it neutralized the toxic elements. He carefully collected the fungi, packing it into reinforced containment tubes. Each tube was a fragile lifeline, holding the difference between survival and death for the starving dragons above. A sudden word drew his attention. One of the scavenger drones hovered closer, drawn by the faint heat of his exosuit. Its red sensor beam swept across the fungi, its mechanical gaze searching. Ronan froze, calculating. He couldn't outrun it in the open canyon. There was only one option. He pulled a graviton flare from his pack and hurled it into a narrow fissure. The flare erupted with a burst of energy, sending the drone spinning toward it. The machine twisted, misfiring its weapons harmlessly into the rock wall. Ronan seized the moment. He darted across the canyon floor, every step timed with the drone's distracted movements. Loose stones crunched underfoot, each sound a gamble. The canyon seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows hiding threats he couldn't even see. His mind raced with calculations. Speed, trajectory, timing, the weight of the fungi, and the fragile state of the dragons relying on him. He paused under a jagged overhang, gasping, sweat stinging his eyes. The air was thin, electric with danger, but he couldn't rest. Behind him he could hear faint whirs, other drones recalibrating, searching. He crouched low, gripping the containment tubes tightly, and waited for the right moment. Then, with a controlled burst of speed, he sprinted toward the canyon exit, leaping over rocks, dodging sensors, sliding under a low-hanging cliff. Every movement was precise, rehearsed in his mind countless times. At last he reached a narrow tunnel, a collapsed mining shaft that offered temporary cover. He pressed himself against the wall, listening as the drones hovered above, scanning. Their red sensors glinted, eyes following him, but the flare had drawn them off course. Not for long. He knew he had only minutes before they corrected their path. Inside the tunnel, the fungi glowed faintly, bioluminescent veins pulsating like a heartbeat. Ronan inspected the tubes. The stabilizers had worked. The toxic elements were neutralized, leaving nutrients intact. Relief surged for a moment, but he pushed it aside. The real danger was getting back to the dragons, to the plateau, before the drones discovered him. He mapped a return path in his mind, using narrow ledges, hidden shadows, and every uneven rock as cover. His hands moved over the canyon wall, steadying himself, balancing, calculating angles. One misstep could send him plummeting into the abyss. He thought of the dragon widow's amber eyes, the hatchling's trembling wings. Their lives depended on his skill and courage. That thought sharpened his focus, giving him the determination to move faster and smarter. Suddenly, a mechanical screech echoed from behind. A second drone had noticed the flare. Its red sensors locked onto his heat signature, closing the distance. Ronan's pulse quickened. There was no room for hesitation. He adjusted his exosuit thrusters, calculating trajectory and force, and shot upward onto a ledge above the canyon floor. Sparks flew as he landed, narrowly avoiding a blast from the drone. He crouched, listening to its whir as it scanned for him. Then he activated another flare, sending the drone careening off the cliff edge, sparks scattering like fireflies. With the immediate threat diverted, Ronan pressed forward. Each step, each careful maneuver brought him closer to the plateau, closer to the dragons waiting in desperation. Fatigue gnawed at his body, every muscle screaming, yet he pushed on. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. And he would act, no matter what, to save the dragons and prove that human determination could overcome impossible odds. At last, the canyon's edge appeared. The plateau above seemed impossibly far, yet he could see the dragon widow, her wings weak, the hatchling leaning against her side. They were alive but barely. The drones were regrouping below, their sensors sweeping the canyon floor. Ronan gritted his teeth. He had the fungi, but now he faced a new problem: getting them up safely to the plateau without the dragons collapsing or being spotted. He swallowed hard, adjusting the containment tubes across his chest. Every ounce of knowledge, every skill honed through years of survival, would be tested in the next moments. One miscalculation, one slip, and everything could end here. Dragons lost, humanity's courage unproven, a mission failed before it began. Ronan stepped onto the canyon ledge, peering up at the plateau. His pulse raced, but determination burned brighter than fear. Above him, the dragons waited, trusting him despite knowing nothing. And below, the drones were coming back. Every second counted. The moment of truth was near. He whispered under his breath, "Hold on. I'm coming." And with that, he prepared for the climb that would decide whether life, hope, and human courage could prevail against overwhelming odds. Ronan's fingers dug into the canyon ledge, scraping against jagged rock as he looked up at the plateau. The dragon widow and her hatchling waited above, fragile and exhausted. Their amber and glassy eyes held a silent plea, a trust he had earned in minutes yet carried the weight of lifetimes. Every instinct screamed caution. One misstep now, one weak grip, and they would all fall into the abyss below. Yet there was no turning back. Courage demanded action, and only he could act. He adjusted the containment tubes strapped across his chest, feeling the weight of survival itself. The plasma fungi would keep the dragons alive, but they were too weak to fly. The plateau was too high to reach without risking collapse. He needed a plan, and fast. Human ingenuity was the only tool left. He scanned the terrain, calculating angles, weight distribution, and thrust needed to lift both dragons without harming them. The exosuit's thrusters were strong but delicate, too much force and the dragons could be crushed. He attached tensile energy nets, woven from high-strength fibers salvaged from abandoned mining equipment, to the harness. The nets cradled the dragons, designed to hold them securely without restricting breathing or movement. The hatchling chirped softly as he lifted it, wings trembling against the fibers. The widow shifted slightly, weak muscles straining, yet she remained calm enough to trust him. Then a shrill whir sounded from the canyon below. The scavenger drones were back. One streaked toward the plateau, sensors glowing red, targeting the heat signature of the dragons and their human rescuer. Ronan's jaw tightened. Hesitation now meant failure. He activated a sequence in the exosuit, synchronizing the thrusters to lift the dragons in a smooth, controlled arc. Every movement was precise, every calculation life or death. The first drone fired a plasma bolt, narrowly missing his shoulder. Sparks flew across the canyon wall as he twisted the harness, letting gravity and thrusters redirect the energy harmlessly. The second drone dived, scanning, tracking. Ronan deployed a magnetic pulse from his gauntlet. The drone systems buzzed, sensors scrambled, and it wobbled in the air, losing track of him momentarily. Timing was everything. He lifted the dragon widow first. Her massive wings hung limp, muscles trembling, but she did not panic. Her trust in him was absolute, fragile but real. The hatchling nestled against her, glowing veins pulsing faintly with renewed strength from the fungi. Ronan guided the harness carefully, moving along the plateau edge, his heart hammering in rhythm with the drone's mechanical whirs. Every misstep, every ounce of miscalculation could send them tumbling. A drone fired again. Ronan rolled to the side using a rock outcropping as cover, then leaped, lifting both dragons higher along the plateau slope. The tensile nets creaked under the weight, but held. Sweat ran down his face. The twin suns were dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows that made the terrain even harder to judge. But he didn't stop. Fear existed, but it was a tool, a signal, not a master. He relied on human skill, patience, and ingenuity. Halfway up, the canyon floor seemed impossibly far below. Ronan gritted his teeth, adjusting thrusters, repositioning the harness, calculating weight, angle, and speed in real time. The widow shivered, weak from hunger and exhaustion. Ronan whispered, soft and steady, "You're safe. Almost there." The hatchling chirped, wings quivering, echoing his own heartbeat. Every life depended on precision, courage, and the human refusal to quit when odds were impossible. The drones had regrouped and circled back. One dove straight at the harness. Ronan calculated a counter-spin, using the canyon's magnetic cliffs to redirect the drone's trajectory. Sparks flew as it slammed into the rock wall harmlessly, its circuits sparking. Another drone fired plasma bolts, but he used the exosuit's reflective shielding to deflect them. Every move was calculated, every second a battle of wits and courage against machines that had no fear, no morality, only logic and lethal precision. Finally, the plateau's edge loomed close. Ronan's arms burned, muscles screaming, but he pushed on. The widow's wings lifted slightly, faint strength returning, the hatchling clinging to her side. With a final surge, he leveraged the thrusters, the tensile net holding, and lifted them onto solid ground. Dust and rock tumbled around them as he collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath, the dragons trembling beside him. The drones retreated, recalculating, but they would not come back immediately. Ronan had won this round. He set the containment tubes on the ground, letting the dragons smell the food. The widow's eyes glimmered, amber flames rekindled with hope. She nuzzled the hatchling, which chirped and spread its weak wings, testing newfound strength. Ronan felt a surge of relief but also pride, not in himself, but in the fact that human courage, intelligence, and determination had tipped the balance between life and death. He stayed crouched for a moment, watching them eat. Hunger was still strong, danger still lurked in the canyon below, but for now they were alive. And they would survive. Humanity had proven once again that it could face impossible odds and not just endure, but save life that others might have left to die. As the suns disappeared behind jagged peaks, casting the canyon in deep violet and shadow, Ronan realized this was only the beginning. The plateau was safe for now, but survival meant more than just food. It meant planning, foresight, and courage to face whatever would come next. He glanced at the horizon, toward distant storms and unknown dangers, and whispered to himself, "We're not done yet. Not by far." Above him, the widow lifted her head, wings stretching slowly, glowing with regained strength. The hatchling chirped in excitement, testing its wings in tentative flaps. And for the first time, Ronan allowed himself a small smile. The canyon had been conquered, the dragons saved, but the story was far from over. Somewhere beyond the shadows, new challenges waited, and he would face them. Human courage, after all, did not rest. The dawn on Arinder 9 arrived slowly, painting the plateau in pale gold and silver. The wind was calmer now, carrying dust only in light swirls, the twin suns rising like guardians over the cracked metal ruins of the abandoned colonies. Ronan Callis sat on a jagged rock, exhausted, muscles screaming from the climb and the weight of the dragons. Yet exhaustion was a small price for life saved. He watched the dragon widow stretch her wings, strong enough now to lift, but still fragile. The hatchling flapped beside her, tentative but determined, glowing veins pulsing with renewed strength. Ronan knew this was only the beginning. The canyon below had been conquered for now, but the plateau offered little long-term security. Predators, rogue drones, and the harsh climate would challenge them again. Yet he also knew that humans had an ability unmatched by any machine or creature: foresight, ingenuity, and the willingness to act when others would only flee. He checked the containment tubes. The fungi had worked. The dragons had energy coursing through them, enough to recover fully if fed and nurtured. Ronan set about preparing a small shelter with materials scavenged from the ruins nearby, reinforcing it to protect against wind, dust, and possible drone surveillance. Every movement was precise. Every action had meaning. He wasn't just feeding dragons. He was proving that human courage and intelligence could preserve life even in worlds that seemed lost. The dragon widow watched him, amber eyes bright with cautious curiosity. She stepped closer, sensing his intentions. There was no fear this time, only calculation and trust. Ronan held out his hand, careful, steady, letting her smell it. The hatchling chirped in encouragement, pressing against her mother's side. Slowly, the widow lowered her head, touching his hand with a delicate nudge. Trust had been earned in moments that felt like lifetimes. Suddenly, movement in the distant canyon drew his attention. Shadows flickered against the rocks and Ronan's pulse quickened. Drones were regrouping, but this time he was ready. Using his hoverbike and carefully placed decoys, he distracted them, sending them on a wild chase through the canyon. Precision, patience, and timing won again. One man against relentless machines, relying on wits and courage. The dragons didn't flinch. They had begun to understand the power of the human mind allied with determination and care. The widow tilted her head, wings stretching as if testing newfound strength. The hatchling flapped clumsily beside her, chirping in delight. Ronan felt a strange warmth, a mix of relief, pride, and awe. Humanity had stepped into a world that had almost forgotten life and, with nothing but courage and ingenuity, preserved it. They had survived and, more importantly, they had hope. He spent hours reinforcing the makeshift shelter and setting up a water condenser scavenged from the ruins. Every system had to work perfectly. One mistake could undo everything. But Ronan thrived in challenges like this. He moved methodically, balancing the technical and emotional needs of his companions. He could see it in the dragon's eyes. They recognized that he was not only intelligent but moral, willing to sacrifice comfort, safety, and even life to ensure theirs. That recognition, silent, powerful, was the ultimate reward. By mid-afternoon, the widow and hatchling were exploring cautiously, testing their wings, tasting the air. Ronan provided nutrient gel in measured doses, mixing it with the stabilized fungi. He watched their reactions, noted every movement. Each improvement, each beat of the hatchling's wings, reinforced his sense of purpose. He realized something profound. Survival was not merely about strength. It was about intelligence, morality, and the courage to act when everything seemed impossible. As the suns dipped toward the horizon, Ronan stood at the edge of the plateau, looking out over the canyon he had conquered. Dust swirled below, shadows shifting, but for now the world was quiet. The widow rose into the air, wings catching the sunlight, her body strong and sure. The hatchling followed, faltering at first, then finding rhythm, circling Ronan in a silent display of trust and gratitude. His chest tightened as he watched them soar. He had done more than feed dragons. He had saved lives against impossible odds, and in doing so, proven that humans could shine in ways no machine, predator, or hostile world could match. A soft breeze carried the faint sound of their roars, echoing across the plateau. Not cries of hunger or pain, but sounds of survival, triumph, and respect. Ronan allowed himself a smile. He had faced death, danger, and uncertainty, and humans had prevailed. Intelligence, courage, morality, and determination had won the day. He turned back to the plateau, the shelter, and the dragons resting beside it. For the first time he allowed himself a small sense of peace. The canyon below was still dangerous, the horizon still uncertain, but the dragons had survived and he had proven what humans could do. Humanity could fight, survive, and protect life, even in worlds that had been written off as hopeless. Above, the widow hovered briefly, wings spread wide, her amber eyes locking on Ronan's. The hatchling chirped, circling him joyfully. He reached out his hand and the widow gently nudged it. It was not just gratitude, it was understanding, a silent acknowledgement that one human had made a difference where none seemed possible. Ronan exhaled slowly, looking at the rising twin suns. The world was harsh, uncertain, and dangerous. Yet, in that moment life had survived. Courage had triumphed. Intelligence had prevailed. Humanity had shown that even in the darkest corners of the universe, there was hope. And somewhere deep in the canyon below, new challenges waited, but for now the plateau was theirs. And that, he thought, was enough.